In this video, I'm going to look at CADJPY using the 1 hour bar, and I'm going to look at how price unfolded this week versus the previous week's volume profile. This is a follow-up video to the earlier one where I looked at the previous month's volume profile. So I'm going to leave this purple line here because that's the previous month's VPOC, and then this is last week's VPOC, 92.49. 93.08 is the previous week's high, and here we are, 91.79 is the previous week's low. So in terms of last week's point of control, we have not traded to last week's point of control, and it is now 11 o'clock on Friday. So chances are, unless we see an incredible strong run, we're not going to hit last week's point of control. And we bring in this week's current week profile, so we can see the current week's profile is trading pretty much outside of the main volume area of last week, and it's below. So this week looks like it was mostly sideways movement. We haven't come outside of the previous week's trading area, and we haven't come outside most of the previous day's trading area because we were always inside the previous day's price range. So we had a little bit of a volume, little bit of trading down here. And it's reflected in the volume profile here. So we're right now at a level of, if we break below last week's volume profile, then I would look for, whether that happens today or it happens at the start of next week, we get below 91.66, then I'd look for price to come further down to about 91.45. If this holds, if we can't get below last week's low, then look for this week's volume profile to be where price may come back to. And if we get beyond that, then you want to look up to this level here, which is another VPOC level. So we've got sort of 3 VPOC levels for this week that's been developed, whereas the previous week we had this range here. And over here we've got the 1, 2, and then 3 here. So we're lacking in direction this week. That's what it's saying. If the price turns around and breaks out of the highs or lows, so what it looks like is that this is setting up for next week for directional trading. Which direction, we don't know yet. It needs to break out of this comfort zone, and if it doesn't, then just look for it to just continue in this range right here, which is about 91, where it is right now, up to the low side, and then to the high side, up to 92.67. Now, if I just, let me just remove, that's not what I wanted. Remove this, manual, there you go. Just for a moment, I'm going to remove this current week's profile and just look at last week's profile. So where did we open relative to last week's profile? Well, the week opened up here at 92.10, and we trended to the downside. We moved to the, this is not a trend, but we moved to the downside. But once we moved to the downside, and we're finding some support at the previous week's low volume area, which is right here at 91.79. It's finding support. Then it breaks below that, but had no continuation. It comes back in, comes back up, and continues trading in this area here. And we saw that in the volume being built here in the current week's profile. But in terms of the previous week's profile, once I saw that it didn't want to, it wasn't getting any sustained move to the downside below the previous week's volume profile, and then it gets back into the previous week's volume profile, then the target level is the previous week's VPOC. And it looked like that's where we were heading, and we never made it up there. Yesterday was a holiday. Today's Friday. Chances are you're not going to get a lot of activity. U.S. Thanksgiving. I know it's CADJPY. And I believe earlier in the week, Monday, was the Japanese holiday. So these holidays is probably why we're getting such sideways movement. Now, if we come back into, if we get accepted and this thing starts to move up, then 92.49 has got to be where it targets up to, perhaps even up to the higher end of it, which is 92.67. If it breaks back down below this previous week's profile, then I'm expecting it to come further down. It's going to come below here, hit the stops below here, and maybe even a little bit further down. So this week is pretty much lacking in direction, and what I should closely watch is this current volume profile we see here, and then on Sunday, or at the end of today, this will become the previous week's volume profile, and it's a pretty tight area. So if we break below this current previous week's volume profile, then look for this to keep coming further down. If we break back into this week's purple volume profile, then look for it to come all the way to the top. If it gets accepted up here, then look for it to run to 92.49, even further up to 92.67. Next week will be interesting because it is the end of November and the start of December, so we could get some new positions coming into the market, and they may indicate the direction that December will run to. Will it run further up and perhaps come up to 93, or will it run further down and head down to about 91 even? The key here is to always remember, Nazar, trade from the low volume areas to the high volume areas. Do not trade from the high volume areas. You want to trade to the high volume areas, and you want to trade from the low volume areas.